Welcome back to Real Life Documentary, a channel that's dedicated to telling you real-life tragic stories. Please support us by subscribing to our channel and liking our videos. Now to today's episode. Elena Novak and Darren Thornberry's love story began in an unexpected place. A busy laundromat on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Elena, a college senior at the time, was wrestling with an overloaded washing machine when Darren, a recent graduate embarking on his first job, stepped in to help. Their eyes met over a mess of damp laundry, and the connection was immediate. Their relationship blossomed quickly, filled with coffee dates, long walks, and late-night talks about their dreams. Elena was drawn to Darren's calm demeanor and sharp mind, while Darren admired Elena's energetic zest for life and her commitment to becoming a teacher. Within a year, they were engaged, and 6 months later, they exchanged vows in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. The early days of their marriage were full of happiness. They bought a charming starter home in Springfield and eagerly set about renovating it. Elena secured a teaching position at Springfield Elementary, quickly becoming a beloved figure among her students and their parents. Meanwhile, Darren's career in software engineering began to flourish, as his innovative ideas gained recognition at work. On their third wedding anniversary, they decided it was time to start a family. Both Elena and Darren came from large, close-knit families, and they were eager to start one of their own. Months passed, then a year, but they had no success. At first, they tried not to worry, reassuring each other that it just takes time. But as the second year came and went, concerns started to settle in. Their first visit to a fertility specialist was filled with cautious hope, but the news they received was heartbreaking. Due to a combination of issues, Darren's low sperm count and Elena's hormonal imbalances, their chances of conceiving naturally were very slim. The doctor discussed their options: IVF, surrogacy, or adoption. Determined to explore every possibility, Elena and Darren dived into IVF treatments. The process was tough, a constant cycle of hope followed by disappointment. Each failed attempt wore down their optimism and put a strain on their relationship. Elena became consumed with tracking her fertility cycle, while Darren threw himself into his work, avoiding the heartache he saw in Elena's eyes after each negative test result. After 3 failed IVF cycles, they were both emotionally and financially exhausted. The strain on their relationship became more visible in their daily lives. Elena's usual bright spirit faded, and her smile no longer reached her eyes. Darren, once easygoing, grew moody and withdrawn, and small disagreements began to escalate into bigger conflicts. Their home was filled with tension. It was during this difficult time that Zara Felton, Elena's former college roommate and longtime friend, came back into their lives. Zara had spent the past few years traveling the world, working on her art, and experiencing new cultures. Her return to Ashton brought a new energy into the Thornberry household. Zara's free-spirited nature and positive outlook helped Elena and Darren rediscover some of the joy and laughter that had been missing from their lives. As Elena shared their struggles with Zara, a new idea began to form. Little did they know, this idea would be the catalyst for a series of events that would change their lives forever. Zara Felton had always been a magnetic presence, with her vibrant hair, striking emerald eyes, and a mischievous smile that never seemed to fade. She had a natural ability to draw people in, like moths to a flame. Her friendship with Elena was instant and deep, forged during late-night study sessions and shared dreams of making a difference in the world. While Elena chose a stable career in education, Zara embraced the unpredictable life of an artist. Her bold, expressive paintings had earned her a modest following in the art world, but it was her wanderlust that truly defined her. For the past 5 years, Zara had traveled the globe, drawing inspiration from the bustling streets of Tokyo, the peaceful temples of Thailand, and the rugged landscapes of New Zealand. Her return to Ashton came at a time when Elena and Darren were at one of their lowest points in their struggle with infertility. Zara's presence brought a much-needed sense of light and joy back into their lives. She filled their home with stories of her adventures, made them laugh, and reminded them of the simple pleasures they had forgotten amid their struggles. As Zara spent more time with Elena and Darren, she couldn't help but notice the sadness that lingered behind Elena's smile, and the weariness in Darren's eyes. One evening, over a bottle of wine, Elena finally broke down and shared with Zara the heartbreaking details of their failed attempts to conceive and the emotional strain it had placed on their marriage. Zara listened with a heavy heart, her own eyes filling with tears as she absorbed the depth of her friend's pain. As Elena spoke about the options they had considered, including egg donation, Zara suddenly felt a deep sense of clarity. Without hesitation, she offered to be their donor. The room went completely silent. Elena and Darren exchanged shocked looks, unable to process what they had just heard. Zara, her voice steady and full of conviction, explained that she had never wanted children of her own, but had always admired Elena's natural maternal instincts. She saw this as a way to give her friend the greatest gift possible, the chance to become a mother. The decision wasn't made that night. Elena and Darren needed time to digest the offer and consider all the emotional and practical implications. But as the days passed, the idea began to take hold. They researched the egg donation process, consulted doctors, and had long, honest discussions about how this would affect their lives and their friendship with Zara. After weeks of careful deliberation, they agreed to move forward. With a mix of apprehension and hope, they embarked on a journey that would forever change all of their lives. The process of egg donation and IVF was a whirlwind of medical appointments, hormone injections, and cautious optimism. Zara approached her role with her usual enthusiasm, following the doctor's instructions carefully and maintaining a positive attitude throughout the hormone treatments and egg retrieval. For Elena and Darren, every step brought both anxiety and excitement. They attended every appointment with Zara, offering support and growing increasingly hopeful as they moved closer to their dream of becoming parents. The day of the egg retrieval was charged with nervous energy. As Zara was wheeled into the procedure room, Elena squeezed her hand, tears of gratitude in her eyes, while Darren paced in the waiting room, anxiously checking his watch and flipping through outdated magazines to distract himself. Hours later, they received the news they had been hoping for. The procedure was a success. The fertility clinic had retrieved several viable eggs from Zara, bringing them one step closer to their dream of starting a family. The next step was fertilization using Darren's sperm, and then implantation. The 2-week wait after the embryo transfer felt agonizing. Elena fluctuated between cautious optimism and the fear of another disappointment. Darren tried to stay strong for her, but his own anxiety showed in long nights at the office and an increased focus on his homebrewing hobby. Finally, the day of the pregnancy test arrived. As Elena stepped out of the bathroom, pregnancy test in hand, time seemed to freeze. With trembling fingers, she turned the test to reveal 2 pink lines positive. They were pregnant. Their home erupted in celebration, with Darren sweeping Elena into his arms as they laughed and cried in equal measure. They immediately called Zara, putting her on speakerphone to share the joyful news. Zara's excited cheers echoed through the phone. In the days that followed, Elena floated on a cloud of happiness, daydreaming about nursery colors and baby names. Darren's smile returned, the weight of their struggles lifting from his shoulders. They shared their news with close family and friends, basking in the congratulations and well wishes. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though their happy ending had finally arrived. But beneath the surface, subtle tensions began to stir, quietly threatening their newfound joy. As Elena's pregnancy progressed, there was a noticeable shift in the dynamics between the 3 friends. At first, it was hardly noticeable, a lingering glance here, a shared inside joke there. But as the weeks passed, Elena's emotional state, heightened by pregnancy hormones and lingering insecurities from their fertility struggle, began to magnify every small interaction between Darren and Zara. It started innocently enough. Zara, wanting to support her friends during the pregnancy, began visiting more often. She would bring prenatal vitamins, books on childbirth, and healthy snacks for Elena. Her thoughtfulness was appreciated, but Elena couldn't help but notice the way Zara's eyes would brighten when Darren came home from work or how Darren seemed more animated in Zara's presence. One evening, Elena overheard Darren and Zara laughing in the kitchen. "She's my best friend, and he's my husband," Elena told herself. It's natural for them to get along. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "But is it more than that?" As her pregnancy progressed, so did her paranoia. She began to scrutinize every interaction, every text message, every casual touch. When Darren complimented Zara's new haircut, jealousy churned in Elena's stomach. When Zara brought over a homemade meal to give Elena a break, she couldn't help but wonder if it was just an excuse to see Darren. Elena tried to rationalize her feelings, reminding herself of the incredible gift Zara had given them, But at night, as Darren slept beside her, her mind raced with doubts and what-ifs. The turning point came during Elena's baby shower. As she watched Darren and Zara setting up decorations, she saw Zara playfully swat Darren's arm, her hand lingering just a moment too long. In that instant, all of Elena's fears crystallized into a single terrifying thought. What if the baby brings them closer together instead of us? From that day on, Elena's behavior changed. She became moody and withdrawn, snapping at Darren over minor things and making excuses to avoid seeing Zara. When Darren suggested inviting Zara over for dinner, Elena's reaction was disproportionately hostile, leaving Darren confused and hurt. Worried, Darren tried to talk to Elena about her changing mood, but she dismissed his concerns, blaming it on pregnancy hormones. In reality, she was spiraling deeper into suspicion and fear, convinced that her husband and best friend were developing feelings for each other. As Elena retreated further into her thoughts, the distance between her and Darren grew. The joy and excitement of preparing for their baby were overshadowed by an ever-present tension. With her due date approaching, Elena's paranoia reached new heights. She began keeping a detailed log of Darren's activities, noting any deviations from his schedule. Her phone became a tool for constant surveillance, checking Darren's location and scrutinizing his interactions with Zara on social media. Darren, unaware of the depth of Elena's suspicions, assumed her behavior was due to pre-baby anxiety. He tried to be patient, but the constant questioning and mood swings were wearing him down. He found himself staying late at work more often, telling himself it was to prepare for paternity leave. Deep down, though, he knew he was avoiding the growing tension at home. Sensing the shift in Elena's behavior, Zara tried to give the couple some space. Her texts became less frequent, and her visits became sporadic. However, Zara's absence only intensified Elena's suspicions. Why isn't she checking in? Is she meeting Darren in secret? Elena wondered. One afternoon, convinced she would catch Darren in a lie about working late, Elena decided to surprise him at work. When she arrived, she was told he had left early. Panic set in as she called him repeatedly, but her calls went straight to voicemail. In reality, Darren had gone to a nearby park to clear his head after a stressful day, his phone dead from hours of meetings. But to Elena, this was proof of her worst fears. When Darren finally came home, she unleashed months of pent-up accusations. "She's carrying your baby. How could you do this to us?" she cried. Darren, shocked and deeply hurt by the accusations, denied any wrongdoing. The argument quickly escalated, years of frustration and pain boiling to the surface. Neighbors would later report hearing shouting and the sound of breaking glass. In the aftermath of the fight, Elena fled to her sister's house, ignoring Darren's pleas to return and talk things through. Sleepless nights followed as she scrolled through old photos of the three of them, searching for any signs she might have missed, convincing herself her suspicions were justified. Meanwhile, Darren, desperate to save his marriage and protect their unborn child, reached out to Zara for advice. This seemingly innocent act would prove to be a critical mistake. When Elena checked the phone records and saw multiple calls between Darren and Zara, it cemented her belief in their betrayal. Upon returning home, Elena's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She installed hidden cameras around the house, hacked into Darren's email, and even hired a private investigator to follow him. When Darren discovered the extent of Elena's actions, he was devastated. The trust between them, already fragile, was completely shattered. As Elena's pregnancy entered its final weeks, their home became a battleground of suspicion and resentment. Darren began sleeping in the spare room, trying to avoid Elena's volatile moods. Elena, consumed by jealousy and fear, convinced herself that Darren and Zara were plotting to take her baby away from her. Her deteriorating mental state pushed her towards a dangerous decision, one that no one could foresee, but which would have fatal consequences, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. The evening of July 15th started like so many before, tense and silent. Elena, now 38 weeks pregnant, sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Darren was working late again, or at least that's what he had said. The ticking of the clock echoed in the empty house, each second amplifying Elena's spiraling thoughts. When Darren finally turned the key in the lock just after 9 p.m., Elena's heart raced. She listened to his familiar footsteps, the sound of his briefcase hitting the floor, the rustle of his jacket. He entered the kitchen, his face etched with exhaustion. "Elena, we need to talk," Darren began softly but firmly. "I can't keep living like this. We need help." The tension in the room was palpable as Elena, driven by paranoia, confronted Darren. Her accusations of him wanting to send her away to be with another woman hung heavily in the air. Darren, pushed to his breaking point, vehemently denied any affair with Zara, insisting that Elena's fears existed only in her mind. Their argument quickly spiraled out of control, with years of suppressed emotions erupting. Elena hurled accusations, while Darren desperately denied them, trying to reason with her. Amid the chaos, Darren's phone buzzed with an incoming text. In a flash, despite her advanced pregnancy, Elena snatched the phone before Darren could stop her. The message was from Zara. Just a simple check-in and offer of support. But to Elena, already in a fragile mental state, this innocent text became damning evidence. She saw it as a coded confirmation of an affair and darker suspicions involving her unborn child. This perceived betrayal was too much for Elena. With a scream, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the nearby shelf and swung it at Darren. He ducked, and the vase shattered against the wall. Darren, shocked by the sudden violence, backed away, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Elena, please, you need to calm down. Think of the baby." But Elena was beyond reason. She charged at Darren, her hands clawing at his face. In the struggle, they crashed into the kitchen island. Darren, trying to restrain Elena without hurting her or the baby, lost his footing on the slick tile floor. Time seemed to slow as Darren fell backward, his head hitting the sharp corner of the granite countertop with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, blood quickly pooling around his head. Elena stood frozen, her rage evaporating as the horrific reality of what had just happened sank in. Darren lay motionless at her feet, his eyes open but unseeing. Trembling, she reached for her phone to call 911 but stopped. Her mind, still warped by months of paranoia, began to twist a new narrative. "They'll take my baby," she thought, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "They'll say I'm crazy and take my baby away." In that moment, Elena made a decision that would seal her fate. Instead of calling for help, she began to clean. She mopped up the blood, disposed of the broken vase, and dragged Darren's body to the garage. As the night wore on, desperation and madness fueled her actions. By dawn, Darren's car was gone, along with any obvious signs of the struggle. Elena sat once again at the kitchen table, rehearsing the story she would tell. How Darren had left after another argument and how she feared something terrible had happened to him. When she dialed 911 to report her husband missing, Elena felt the baby kick, and a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over her. She would do anything to protect this child, even if it meant living with the horrifying truth of what she had done. The disappearance of Darren Thornberry sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Springfield. Police cars and crime scene tapes surrounded the Thornberry home, drawing concerned neighbors to their lawns, exchanging rumors and theories. Detective Amani Okafor, a seasoned investigator with the Ashton Police Department, was assigned to the case. From the moment she entered the Thornberry home, something felt off. Elena's story, that Darren had stormed out after an argument and never returned, seemed plausible, but Okafor's instincts told her there was more to it. As the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Elena's account began to emerge. Neighbors reported hearing a loud argument and the sound of breaking glass, contradicting Elena's claim that Darren had left quietly. Darren's co-workers said he had been excited about the baby's arrival, and it seemed unthinkable that he would abandon his family. Zara, devastated by Darren's disappearance and worried for her friend, tried to support Elena. But as days turned into weeks, the police search expanded. Darren's car was eventually found abandoned at a bus station 2 towns over. But security footage didn't show Darren leaving the vehicle, deepening the mystery of what had really happened to him. Darren's credit cards and phone remained unused, as if he had vanished into thin air. Behind the scenes, forensic teams meticulously combed through the Thornberry home. Despite Elena's efforts to clean, luminol revealed traces of blood in the kitchen. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Darren. The noose began to tighten around Elena. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. A teenager, testing out his new drone, had captured footage of someone matching Elena's description struggling to load a large, heavy object into Darren's car in the middle of the night. Armed with this new evidence, Detective Amani Okafor knew it was time to confront Elena and uncover the tragic truth behind Darren Thornberry's disappearance. With mounting evidence, Detective Okafor decided to take a more aggressive approach. She brought Elena in for questioning, hoping that the pressure of the police station environment would crack her carefully constructed facade. At first, Elena clung to her story, her hands protectively cradling her pregnant belly as she recounted the night of Darren's disappearance. But as Okafor laid out the growing inconsistencies, the neighbor's testimony about hearing a fight, the blood found in the kitchen, and now the drone footage, Elena's composure began to falter. The more Okafor pressed, the more cracks began to show in Elena's version of events. Her voice wavered, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes avoiding the detective's steady gaze. Okafor continued, her tone firm but empathetic. Elena, we know what happened wasn't planned, but you need to tell us the truth now, for your sake, for the babies. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Elena broke down. Tears streaming down her face, she began to confess the events of that fateful night, from the argument with Darren to the fatal accident and her panicked cover-up. As the confession spilled out, the room fell silent, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavy in the air. The truth about Darren Thornberry's disappearance was finally revealed. Elena's desperate attempt to protect her child had spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The drone footage weighed heavily on Elena as her composure began to crumble in a tense interrogation that lasted hours. Detective Okafor skillfully unraveled Elena's lies, appealing to her maternal instincts and suggesting that the stress of maintaining her deception could harm the baby. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, Elena broke down. Through tears and gasping sobs, she confessed to killing Darren. She spoke of her growing paranoia and her conviction that Darren and Zara were conspiring against her. She recounted the argument that escalated into violence, ending with Darren's fatal injury. Her voice shook as she described the frantic decision to dispose of his body, driven by an overwhelming need to protect her unborn child. As the trial progressed, Elena sat at the defense table, her baby, a little girl now, in the care of her sister. She appeared pale and drawn, her eyes often unfocused, as if watching the proceedings from a great distance. When she finally took the stand, her testimony was a confused jumble of remorse, justification, and lingering paranoia. In his closing arguments, Prosecutor Ocone pleaded for understanding, asking the jury to consider the perfect storm of circumstances that had led to this tragedy. In contrast, defense attorney Reyes urged the jury to focus on Elena's actions after Darren's death, the calculated cleanup and the elaborate lie, as evidence of her culpability. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. They found Elena guilty of second-degree murder, rejecting both the prosecution's argument for premeditated homicide and the defense's plea for manslaughter. The judge, taking into account Elena's mental state and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 18 years in prison. As Elena was led away, her anguished sobs echoed through the courtroom. Zara, watching from the gallery, wept quietly, the weight of her role in the tragedy evident in her hunched shoulders. Outside, a subdued crowd received the news. The sensational story ended not with a bang, but with a collective sigh of sadness for lives so needlessly destroyed.